welcome. I thought we would do something that I've been planning to do for some time. People have been asking me this for some time too. I think it's been years now that people have been asking me on stream from time to time, and because they know that I'm very much fond of Resident Evil. But they just know that I like Resident Evil 2 the best, probably. Based on first playthroughs, maybe? I don't know anymore even. And that there's a whole bunch of games that I like within the series, and that there's a whole bunch of games I don't like within the series. Resident Evil is probably my favorite game series of all time, so I thought we would do something very different today, of trying actually to rate the Resident Evil games. It's important to note that I have no sort of script or anything. This is all on the fly, and my cat is also sort of bothering me, but we'll try to get through this as best as possible. I can already tell that there's a couple of games here I haven't played. One of them being Gun Survivor, and the other one being Gun Survivor 2. I believe it's here somewhere. It's probably that I just can't see it. Yeah, Gun Survivor 2. I have both games, but I have yet to play them. So, starting, or just go from left to right. Of course, S is best, F is worst, of course. This is, I believe it is Umbrella Chronicles. The rail shooter, the sequel rail shooter, if nothing else, in the Chronicles series. There's two of them. The rail shooter games are, I don't know, they're okay-ish for what they are, but they really don't feel like too much of a Resident Evil game. Even though there's quite a few of them, from what I understand. Gun Survivor 1 and 2 is also rail shooters, or somewhere around that area. One of my main issues with Umbrella Chronicles was it came out on the Wii, so it looked like shit. So there was a it was very blurry when the camera was moving around and stuff, and the camera moved around a lot in that game. I haven't played the HD remastered version or whatever you want to call it on PlayStation. I think it's like a D sort of game. I enjoy them for what they are. They're like a couple of hours of okay fun if you have someone to play with. But other than that, I don't think there's too much else to those games, because of, like I said, how much the camera moves around and everything is really hard to see sometimes. I remember that even the ridicule, that you can see there's a stripe of blur going after the ridicule all over the place. So now we come to the fact of why I'm not sure anymore if Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil 2 from 1998 is my favorite. Because the 2002, I think it's 2002, version of Resident Evil 1 on GameCube is mwah. It's so good. It's at least up here too. It's at least within the Resident Evil franchise, it is the second best or the best game, I feel like. The graphics were amazing at the time. They still sort of hold up today. They look sort of janky, of course. But the pre-rendered backgrounds still look amazing. The mansion looks amazing. The additions that they made, I feel like is very welcome, with the Lisa addition and all that sort of jazz. I feel like the changes they made to that game is for the better in every single aspect of it. I don't think there's anything in that game that I don't like. I need to think for a second. I actually think I like everything about this game when it comes to the Resident Evil franchise. Yeah, I don't know if there's too much else to say about that game. It's how a remake should be done. It's the perfect example of adding something that makes the game even better. Because the Lisa section and the story around Lisa and her family is quite fucked up. But I like it. It's very nice. The Resident Evil 2 remake, I also feel like is one of those things where the remake is really, really, really good. I'll put it here. The addition of making sure that during a first playthrough, you'll get to experience everything that the game has to offer is both good and bad. Good in the fact that they're ensuring that people that don't want to play both sides or whatever actually get to experience everything, but also it diminishes the replay value for people who want to play both sides. Because I think, if I remember correctly, like the differences is between some keys and whatnot. That's the only thing that's sort of different. So I don't know. So I feel like the original Resident Evil 2 had better replay value because of the fact that Mr. X and stuff didn't show up before the second scenario, so the second scenario felt very different compared to the first one. Here I think that both scenarios feel way more similar to one another, but it, like I said, it also ensures that you'll experience the full aspects of what the game has to offer during the first playthrough, which is nice, I guess. Except for, of course, Sherry versus Ada. There you have the like major differences between the two, where there's certain gameplay sections that's only available for Claire, and certain gameplay sections that's only available for Leon. That being said, I feel like the gameplay section for both of those two are unique in their own way. They're way more unique than in the original Resident Evil, where in the original one you solve like a puzzle including some cases that you like push around and you run away from zombie dogs and normal zombies. That's all that you do. Where in this game you have Ada has sort of the unique gun thing where you need to hack, and Sherry has to stealth past the police chief. So it's way more unique this time around. But the Ada section, for example, especially the Ada section, I really don't like. I feel like it's so boring to just aim for the wall and aim like follow wires around and stuff. I feel like that's boring, so I don't know. That sort of dragged the game down a bit for me, but I think like there's not too much else to the game that I don't like. I feel like the way they handled Mr. X was okay, that he sort of was walking around the entire time now. That was okay, so I didn't mind that at all. So I think that this is also like a remake where the basis for the game is already so good, because I really enjoyed Resident Evil 2. So the base is already so good that if they just follow that, they'll have a good game, and if they modernize it, they'll have a great game. So I think that's what they did. Gaiden, oh yeah, Gaiden is also one of those games which I haven't played, so I can't put it anywhere. Is this file 2? Outbreak? I think it is. File 2 is also a game that I actually didn't play. Dead Aim is, I don't know, one of the worst Resident Evil games that I've ever played. It's around here somewhere. Probably here. The game is about 2 hours long. 2, 3, 4? I can't remember. It's fairly short, even on a first playthrough. The characters that you meet in that game is super silly. The dude that you play is this guy who's hitting on the other lady that I can't even remember the name of. I can't remember the name of the guy we play even. And I remember that my version also kept having different subtitles compared to what they were actually saying. So that was sort of fucked too. It's a mix and match between a rail shooter and like a normal Resident Evil game. When you walk around, it's a normal Resident Evil game. But when you aim, it's a rail shooter. I really didn't like this game. The boat was super boring to explore for me. It felt like you were walking in the same corridors for the entire game, and the corridors weren't exactly any nice to look at because it was just dark and bland. The shooting was janky as hell. Shooting with like 2 sticks was janky. All that I remember that I did was backing up all the time and aiming. That was all that I did, I felt like. So I really didn't like that game. The last boss was silly. This is like a stupendously huge sludge dude or lady that were just like slowly following you. I didn't like that game. Umbrella Chronicles, I feel like it's the same as Dark Side Chronicles. I like the setting more here because here they have Resident Evil 1, and I feel like a rail shooter setting for Resident Evil 1 is okay-ish, but still feel the exact same way in Umbrella Chronicles that I do for in Dark Side Chronicles. So what I said about Dark Side Chronicles also applies to Umbrella Chronicles, basically. Resident Evil Revelations 2. Put it here, maybe? Need to think. The gameplay system that they have in that game, where one character is able to handle weapons and the other one isn't. Some people feel like that is like an interesting spin on the multiplayer formula, because you can play this game with multiplayer, or you need to change between each character. I feel like it's annoying. It just feels silly that I change from one character to point, because that's what the character does at times. She actually points, like, and that's the thing that you do in that game as that particular character. For example, you just point at things. Here. I don't know, I don't like it. Story and everything, where they actually put in a new form of Wesker, sort of interesting. I like playing as Claire. I think it's nice that we get to actually play as Barry this time around. So I think it's like a continuation of the story on their part that makes sense. And I think the gameplay is also like okay. It feels very handheld-ish though, because of the first game was originally on handheld, and it feels like they're using the same engine, just an updated version one. The shooting doesn't feel as impactful. The enemies doesn't seem to react too much to the shooting compared to what you're used to from a Resident Evil game, where you're like in the newer ones, and Revelations isn't that old. I can't remember when Resident Revelations is from. 2015. Holy shit. Yeah, but then already there were Resident Evil games out, because of Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5, for example. Which had the super nice impact system, where if you shot someone in the leg, they fell over or whatever. I can't remember seeing that too much in Resident Evil Revelations 2. I don't know if it actually happens or not. I can't tell for sure. I haven't played that game in some time. From what I can remember, it doesn't. And the mini games that they offer in that game is also sort of silly, where the lockpicks, you're just looking for circles that you can't actually see. So there's one big circle, and you just have a pointer that goes around on the circle, and you press down a button, and if your controller vibrates, that means that the circle that you're looking for is close or on the spot that you're actually pressing. I didn't like that either, so I think it's a C. C, by the way, is decent. That's like as you can tell, it's in the middle of the table, so it's something that's okay to play. So D is just underneath that. It's like meh. And F is of course the worst ones. Survivor 2, didn't play. Umbrella Corps, here, played it for one day. Multiplayer shooter, 4 versus 4, 5 versus 5, I can't remember. Silly as shit. The single player campaign played just, I think it was just the same level over and over again, it felt like, with different environments. You were shooting zombies, picking up like chemicals or whatever from their body, and you needed to do that a specific amount of times to proceed to the next level. That's what you did the entire game. The shooting felt like shit. You were so freaking close, I remember, to their gun when you like aimed. It was silly. The character moved super janky around. They'll move like super fast. When you were on the ground, you didn't slow down. So if you were proning, you were proning just as fast. It was like, it's a multiplayer shooter within the Resident Evil franchise. F for me. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. B, maybe? There are certain aspects of Resident Evil 3 that I don't like particularly enjoy. I am actually one of those people that felt like that in the remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake, which isn't here because this list was probably made before that. I felt like they actually handled Nemesis up to a certain point in the game, of course, because after a certain point in the game, Nemesis becomes irrelevant except for cutscene or very specific based places. Up until that point, I felt like they handled him better than what they did in the original. Where in the original, it was always like this thing, and you get 2 choices, where in this game he just comes like sort of out of nowhere, and you have to make your choice on the fly. It was like embedded into the gameplay instead of being a choice and then deciding if it was going to be a gameplay based encounter, or it was just, I'm pushing him and I'm running and we're done. I think like Nemesis was maybe a bit too much in the game. In the first one, it's like every single place. What else is it with Resident Evil 3 that makes me not put it higher? I personally don't like the worm. I know that people nowadays, especially because the worm got cut out from the remake, that they're giving the worm a lot of credit, but I didn't like the worm. It felt like such a weird stage. Walking around down there just back and forth and just shooting the worm when he popped up in the different sort of areas. I don't know, felt weird to me. But I don't know, it's hard to tell for me why Resident Evil 3. I think within the Resident Evil franchise, I enjoy more... No, that's hard to tell too. I don't know why. Some of the things that they did in that game I remember felt like very fetch questy. Like go to the gas station because we need this. Okay. Go there because we need this. Okay. It's hard to tell. Maybe I'll get back to that. Resident Evil 6. Oh boy. Resident Evil 6 was one of those games where I felt like the first time I played it, I was like, it's a new Resident Evil. And there's multiplayer. They're building on the thing of Resident Evil 5. And I played through it. I enjoyed it somewhat. I was like, okay, yeah, this is okay-ish. Then I played through it again. And then I started noticing the parts that I didn't like. Like the fact that every time they seem like the game sort of like picks up, quote unquote, and you start having somewhat fun, the game pulls you out by a cutscene. And the cutscene is usually meaningless because it's usually two people just shouting at each other or somewhere around that area. And usually it's between a character that you do somewhat care about because they've been in the game for way longer than the other character. Like Leon versus Helena. I don't care particularly about the relationship between the two. So when they're talking to each other, it's like, oh, can we just move on? And it's the same thing between all of the other characters. Because Sherry, of course, originally from Resident Evil 2, is also with the character that's introduced in Resident Evil 6, the son of Albert Wesker, Jake Muller? And then it's Pierce and Chris. Pierce also introduced in Resident Evil 6. So it's like new characters with old characters and all that sort of jazz all the way through. Chris's campaign is thoroughly boring. It's just shooting the same things over and over again in usually dark or very bright places. Usually it's nighttime in some eastern country, or it's like almost snow. And it's just shooting the same things over and over and over again. Shooting, moving a bit forward, shooting, moving a bit forward, shooting, moving a bit forward until the campaign is over. And the campaign ends in this super over-the-top way. But of course Resident Evil usually does. By this point, since it's Resident Evil 6, it's evolved into something so fracking over the top, it's crazy. Helena and Leon, where they said that, yeah, this is sort of the horror version of it. I don't feel like it's horror. For me, horror has to have this like creepy atmosphere and everything. And this game doesn't. It has like few cheap jump scares, and there's places where you need to activate a flashlight to walk around. Is that horror? Just because, oh, this place is dark, there's not so much light here, so you need to walk around with a flashlight. And they force walks on you the first hour of the game, almost, it feels like. A lot of the campaigns provide the same cutscenes, just that you see them on the other side of the door the other time around, or whatever. Because usually, or not usually, but sometimes the characters are in the same places. The stories overall, like, I think like every single story is uninteresting to me. Like all of a sudden this new guy, I can't remember what he's called even, the guy here who's in Leon and Helena's campaign, which turns into this huge ass fly at the at the end. Resident Evil 6 is a D for me, I think. Maybe even an E, but I think D. E? Yeah, fuck it. I think it's E, actually. Resident Evil 7. A breath of fresh air into the Resident Evil franchise, which is desperately needed after Resident Evil 6. First part of the game, where you're like in the enclosed area of the Baker family's estate, both inside and out. Really nice. The places where you replay past events through videotapes. Really nice. Especially like the birthday scene and whatever is really cool. First person perspective, okay. I've always liked the third person perspective more when it comes to horror games, but I think that's because I grew up with like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. What I didn't like, the ship. The entire section of the ship was shitty. The variety of enemies were shitty. The mansion thingy, the estate, I really enjoyed. That was thoroughly enjoyable. And then it sort of fell down a step when it came to the boat, but it still heaps better than, for example, Resident Evil 6. Here, put it here. Code Veronica. Me, myself, I feel like Code Veronica gets a lot of undeserved shit. I'm going to say it. Because I don't think that Code Veronica is that bad. I think that Code Veronica is actually quite enjoyable. Code Veronica has one shitty character, like one really shitty character that you need to deal with a lot of the game. Steve is a super shitty ass character. Poorly written, out of this world. From his nagging voice to his nagging nature. To how he like treats Claire. like, oh, dollface, cutie, blah blah blah, looks at her ass when she's at the computer and all that sort of jazz. I think that's like the main thing for me. I think that's what drags the game down. It's him, but it doesn't drag the game down to a point where I don't want to play it. I think I played through it like 3 times or whatever, and I've enjoyed like every time we managed to play through it. For me, I think that like this game is somewhere around here. It might even for me be a B. It's like a B, but it's worse than Resident Evil 7 and it's worse than Resident Evil 3. I think that's where that game is for me. Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 1 is of course the game that started the entire thing. When Resident Evil 1 came out, I remember I've never seen anything like it because I didn't play Alone in the Dark and that sort of jazz. So Resident Evil 1 was the first game that introduced me like into mainstream survival horror. And I remember that when that game came out because it looked like people. The models actually looked like people. I remember the first scene where the zombie like turns around. It was crazy. Of course, if you're counting like Resident Evil 1 now, it's aged quite poorly. I don't think it has aged as poorly as people are claiming it to be because of course the voice acting is super cheesy and super shit, but it was back then too. So that's always been like a problem with that game. That's not become a problem now because the game has aged. It was a problem back then too. It was super cheesy back then too. It was like a B movie, very B movie-ish. But I think the way that they've handled like the entire game, where the mansion feels like super creepy, the music is super fitting to the atmosphere of the game. I remember that I have a friend that still hates the music from Resident Evil 1 because it reminds me, it brings him back to when we played that game when we were kids, because I'm born in 1990. So I got introduced to this game when I was 6 years old. Way too early, I know. So I think that speaks volumes about the music. Puzzles were okay for its time. I've always felt like if we're comparing like Silent Hill and Resident Evil to each other, even though Resident Evil has sort of janky combat, I felt like Resident Evil was the game that you played for the gameplay, and Silent Hill was the game that you played for the atmosphere and the puzzles. I felt like that's how you divided the two. I've never seen anything like it when that game came out. I really enjoy that game. It's the game that started it all. But is it better than Resident Evil Remake 2? Or is it? I think so. I still play this from time to time. Like, I think I've completed this game like 12 or 13 times now. And we're come to Resident Evil Revelations 1. Playing as Jill is nice. Playing as the other guys are usually something I don't care about. Carl? No, what the fuck is that other dude called? The bulky dude with shoulder length hair. I can't even remember his name. And the other dudes too, the nerdy tech dudes. The tech dude part, super unnecessary. I don't like playing as those people at all. When the game came out, I didn't even play through it from beginning to end because it was 3DS exclusive. I hate playing on handheld for a huge amounts of times. So I didn't play it from start to finish. I started on it, then I was like, okay, this isn't good enough for me to like sit like this and play it. So I waited until the PlayStation version came out, played through it, somewhat enjoyed it. I think it's okay. I don't like the enemy types. They look weird to me. I did enjoy the upgrading of the weapons that you could find, like if you explored places, you could find weapon parts that you could put on weapons and that you could select for the majority amount of time which upgrade you wanted to put on which weapon. It was not like this fixed thing. This is firepower +1 for the shotgun. It was firepower +1, and you could decide which weapon you wanted to put it into. I like that. I like that the setting went from being this like super big thing to go again and be a bit more claustrophobic, so that it was a lot more like linear on how you were supposed to do things. I don't like the episodes. I don't like the episodes in neither Resident Evil Revelations 1 or 2. It was worse in the second one because then the game got released over time, so the episodes actually got released over time. In Revelations 1, they got released at the same time at least, so you could play the game from start to finish. I don't know if I feel like it fits the Resident Evil formula, but I understand why they did it, especially since the first one was on 3DS. And a lot of people that play on handheld don't play the game for huge amounts of time at a time. But I think like Revelations 1 is still a C for me, but it's in front of Revelations 2. I enjoyed Resident Evil Revelations 1 more than 2. Gun Survivor 1, did not play. This is the 4 games that I haven't played. The rest of them we have played now. Resident Evil 2, originally my favorite Resident Evil game. Like, it was Resident Evil 1 until I played through Resident Evil 1 and 2. Like, I played through Resident Evil 1 on like, let's say a Thursday. Then on the Friday, the following day, I played through Resident Evil 2. That's when I, like, oh shit, I actually think I like Resident Evil 2 better than 1. Speed, it feels more fluid when it comes to the speed. I really enjoy the police station. I think I actually enjoy the police station more than the mansion, believe it or not. And it feels like such a natural place to take the game after Resident Evil 1. So like, put it from a huge ass house with an underground laboratory, to take it from that place to the town next to it, and then like expand. The 2 playthroughs, scenario A and B, feel vastly different in how they play. I enjoy the enemies. The enemy types are nice. The additional liquor was super cool. I like Mr. X. So I think that Resident Evil 2 is still an S game for me. I think it's after Resident Evil 1 Remake, actually. Operation Raccoon City, one of the biggest piles of garbage within the Resident Evil franchise, if you ask me. This is also an F game for me. Playing through the entire thing, it felt like a super generic shooter. That was the entire game, sort of. Resident Evil Outbreak File 1. I think it was a game that was ahead of its time in the fact that they wanted you to play online. I still want remake of this game, or a HD remaster, or wherever, that just allows you to play the game with other people. Because releasing this on PlayStation 4 would of course allow you to like actually use the online capabilities that they wanted you to use all the way back when this came out on PS2, which I didn't back then, and I didn't when we like replayed it not too long ago either. The characters are very generic. The way that they've handled like the AI, that there actually are AI people just running around picking up stuff and all that sort of jazz, I don't necessarily like. The combat and everything in that game feels very slow. I don't like that it's split up into stages, even though it makes sense for the multiplayer thing. I don't like that. But the gameplay, except for the fact that it's like super slow, it still feels like a Resident Evil game in the way you play it. I think it's still somewhere around here, I feel. Here maybe? Resident Evil 4. Also, one of the best Resident Evil games. Even though they changed the formula around completely, it actually worked. Even though it did something entirely different, it actually worked. Like going to Spain, making sure that you actually fought a bunch of things in the daylight, and of course changing the camera completely around with manual aim and everything. I think it's one of the longest Resident Evil games too. Upgrading weapons, that was the first game that introduced that. That also worked really well. I think the only thing that's annoying in that game is of course the fact that you are escorting someone for the entire game. But I still think it's one of the best Resident Evil games ever made. Like, it changed the game completely around. So it's still one of the best. But I still think it's worse than both Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 1. But I still think it's within the S tier. And it's Resident Evil 5. The first game that introduced co-op in Resident Evil. And where they really started to go for the action instead of a horror. People give this a lot of smack. Resident Evil 5 as a Resident Evil game, no, it might not be a particularly good game. But as a co-op game, I remember I played this with my brother back when it came out. And we really enjoyed that game, like Resident Evil 5. We thought it was a really well thought out co-op game. But I felt like Resident Evil 5 is a good co-op game. So I think I'll put it a B actually. But behind all the other games like Code Veronica, Resident Evil 7 and Nemesis. Resident Evil 0. First game that introduced having 2 characters at once. I remember when this was announced, I thought it was going to be co-op, fixed camera angles with co-op, which sounded very intriguing. But it ended up not being, of course. I enjoy Resident Evil 0 in what they're trying to tell, like story-wise. That they're trying to like explain what happened the day before Resident Evil 1. I enjoy the gameplay to some extent, because A lot of the shooting, a lot of the running around and stuff feels like Resident Evil. It's very Resident Evil. Fixed camera angles, with doors that needs keys, other puzzles that it's lighter puzzles, blah blah blah, all that sort of jazz. What I don't like is the inventory management in that game. That's something that I dislike so much up until the point where I actively turn away from the game from time to time. If it's like, I have this, okay, I'm going to play through the Resident Evil franchise again now. Resident Evil 0 is something that I usually don't start with, even though it's 0. Solely because of the fact that I hate the hookshot for the first part. I hate having an item that takes up 2 slots that you have to have with you for the entire game after you find it. Or you don't have to have it with you, but if you're going to put it away, you're putting it away on the ground, where you need to run back to it the entire time, which is part of the inventory management that I hate. You have 2 characters, but it still feels like you haven't had any less space than what you do in that game. Because every huge gun takes up 2 slots. You don't have the item box. I don't know why they suddenly started exploring with not having one box that you put items with, which transports with you to all of the other places where you find the item box. Where they had this idea where, of course, if they had too many bullets, they could just put them on the ground and they need to go back to the exact same spot again and take them up again if they want them at a later point. Instead of steadily progressing through the game and then having fixed areas that you can pick up whatever you need. Then you have a specific area that you need to pick up the thing that you need. And that game is also I don't know, but it feels redonkulously difficult compared to some of the other ones. But so I think it's here or here. It's one of these two. I can't decide, so let's put it here for now. Resident Evil Mercenaries is also one of those just weird games where there was a mode in Resident Evil 5 where you could just have a stage where you are trying to shoot as many Las Plagas, not Las Plagas, but as many infected as possible. And they made a whole game out of it on 3DS. So I thought the game mode was okay, but not as good as to validate being its own game. I don't know if I felt like I've made my choices clear in a lot of the ways, but I don't know if I necessarily can make them even more clear without a script or anything. Need to remember, C is not C isn't all that bad. C means that it has as many positive sides as negative sides, sort of, so they weigh each other out, sort of. But of course, B means that there are more positives to it, way more positives to it, almost just positive things about the game. So 3 S tier Resident Evil games, which is Remake, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil 4. I think I'm pleased with this thingy-majiggy, with this tier list. So there you have it. Here you have my tier list of Resident Evil games. If you enjoyed this, I might make another one for Silent Hill, maybe. Because Silent Hill is also a franchise where I've played almost all games. So I might make one for Silent Hill as well, if you enjoy this. So please let me know if you enjoy it by leaving a thumbs up, subscription, or whatever. Comment down below your tier list. That would be nice to see. So until next time, I don't know if there's too much else to say than to just thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll take care of yourself and each other in these difficult times. And always remember that I love you all. Thank you so much for watching. Good, back and bye.